So welcome to today's webinar, where we are celebrating female leaders who are truly thriving in healthcare. I'd like to first begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the lands on which we meet today, who for centuries have shared ancient methods of healing and cared for their communities, and pay our respects to elders past and present. Ladies, thank you all so much for joining us as we celebrate International Women's Day 2025. This year's theme, March Forward for All Women and Girls, is a powerful call to action to create a future where every woman and girl, no matter her background, location, or circumstances, has the opportunity to thrive. So healthcare, we all know, is certainly one of the more female-dominated sectors. And today I am joined by three remarkable women, all of whom have thriving careers in healthcare. Firstly, welcome to Ellen Rogers, who is the dentist in charge in Geraldton, Western Australia. To Karen Madison, the Director of Medical Services in Blackwell Hospital in Outback Queensland, and Leslie Wolfe, OAM recipient, who is the Executive Manager of Health and Community Services at Malala Health Service in remote Northern Territory. Welcome, ladies. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So let's start with leadership. So women, as we know, have historically played a crucial role in healthcare, that very female-dominated industry. Yet leadership positions in healthcare have often been male-dominated. Leslie, I want to start with you. In your experience, do you feel women truly have had equitable opportunities for leadership in healthcare?
Look, I don't. I think it's certainly happening. In years gone by, women were never in leadership positions. In nursing, if you were the matron, of course you were the leader, but you were always dominated by the males. And we didn't see any directors of medical services who were female in those days. And because, that goes back into the 70s. And certainly there weren't a lot of female leaders. And I have to say, it was rather probably crazy of me, but as a senior leader, I was a charge nurse in a hospital, and I worked really hard to get some male nurses because I felt that if we had male nurses in the profession, that they would strive for better wages and conditions, and that would certainly elevate nurses. And, now that seems a bit corny, but at the time it was real. And I love the way now there are so many leaders, or leaders are certainly coming to the fore. I grew up in an era where mothers didn't work. Most girls who graduated my age didn't go back to work. They went home and looked after kids. I was fortunate enough to have a mother who'd never worked, who really made sure that we had every opportunity to continue to work. And I was able to persuade my mother-in-law that that was a good idea, even though she'd never worked. But I think it's starting to change. And I think we really have to work hard to make sure that there are leaders, that we've got that balance. And whether that's a matter of having ratios or what, I don't know. But I think we really have to strive to make sure there's that balance.
Karen, you are a Director of Medical Services. And prior to healthcare, you had a number of other careers in other industries. What differences have you seen now in terms of leadership opportunities for women in healthcare when compared to the other sectors that you've been in?
Yes, Sam, it's a really good question, and it's one that's extremely difficult to answer because you really can only compare apples for apples at that time. As Leslie's just mentioned, the era that existed where females were the primary caregivers, that's not that long ago, really. And to be fair, that was really when I was in tourism. So I really didn't have any idea what was going on in healthcare at the time. But what I do know, in tourism, we certainly had a glass ceiling, and we certainly had very, very few females in leadership roles, although there was probably more proportionately. And I don't know whether that was because tourism was seen as the soft type of a profession or not. But there was certainly a ceiling, and the whole ethos of men dominating was there in tourism. So yeah, I can't answer what was going on in healthcare, but certainly in tourism when I started out and in that industry, was difficult for women.
Leslie, you said there was, for a long time, you never saw female directors of medical services. Was there a turning point in the last few years where there's been more of an influx of females into those roles, or has that just been something that's just progressed over the years?
Look, I think it's evolved, but there probably has been more opportunities, and women have become, well, in my observation, my probably naive observation, I think women are stronger. They know that they can do a better job and they step up. Whereas in years gone by, I mean, over the years, I've been in meetings where I've been scoffed at by arrogant men, and yet really they had no idea of what we were talking about. So I think women have stepped up to the mark. And taken the lead, and I think that's really important. You know, you've got to be prepared to back yourself and take the opportunity.
Fantastic. Ellen, what about in dentistry? So you've worked in private practice as well as in the public health services. Have you found women to have the same leadership opportunities in both of those settings?
Not at all. And Leslie and Karen have said some really, really valid points. And I've certainly lived through that change, being of the younger generation. I sort of grew up being given so many opportunities in leadership. And then in dentistry itself, you know, our workforce is exceedingly female dominated, but our leadership still isn't quite there yet. Nearly half of dentists are female, 46%. When you look at oral health therapists, we're nearly 80 to 90% female. And then dental assistants are exceedingly female. But when you look at specialists, only a third are female. When I first graduated, most of the presidents of our associations and the bigger names of our associations and industries were male dominated. And then this year, as I was wrapping up my role as a board director, we had a 50% ratio of women in our ADAQ board. So like we'd come such a long way, and that was only in a span of, 10 years since my graduation. But in private practice, leadership is really most of the time ownership driven, not entirely, but mostly. Whilst public health is very much, there's pathways into leadership, and I've certainly experienced some really rapid changes in that area as my career's gone over the last 10 years that I don't think were the same for women 20 years ago, 30 years ago in dentistry, that's for sure.
Yeah. Karen, what do you think are the biggest barriers then that we need to address to get more women in leadership and in healthcare particularly, and allow women to have that real thriving career?
I think the traditional barriers still exist as being, biologically, we're the ones that give birth.
Yes.
And really, if a couple want a family, then someone has to give birth. So that does take a female out of the workforce, and losing that productivity is always a barrier and always a challenge. Certainly all of the unpaid labour that women do at home and in the workplace is another barrier, because we're actually not recognised, I think. Largely speaking, I'm generalising here, of course, there's always exceptions, but largely speaking, not recognised for our unpaid labour and our volunteerism. You'll find that there's a lot of women who volunteer in our professions, especially in specialist general practice and in rural generalism. We're involved in associations and events and, trying to get the word out there to encourage the younger generation to come through. But that volunteerism, that is, it's not recognised either.
Yeah.
So they're barriers.
Yeah. Ellen, you just mentioned there around, that the board having, 50% female by the end of that last year, I think it was. Are there other barriers that you've noticed that you think need to be addressed as well? Or perhaps what were the barriers you think the board addressed that got to that point?
A lot of it was just getting more involvement, people being aware that they could have a say, that they could be part of it, and that there became sort of a shift. There was just a mentality shift away from it being a boys' club, because it really, really was for a long time a boys' club. And people were scared to speak up. And that is from speaking with other women in the industry. They didn't feel they had a place at the table. And it took people really fighting to have a place at the table. And now it's become something that's just expected, that there's room for everyone to be part of the table. And I felt like I came from quite an intersectional point, being neurodivergent as well. And it was really lovely to be part of that group at the time. And I'm still part of multiple committees across several states, but it's just really interesting to see that change in real time and to be a part of it. But like barriers in terms of having children, like I've got 2 young boys myself, they're 8 and 4, but without having my partner at home, he really wanted to be the stay-at-home dad, and that worked for us. But it's almost the reverse. Back in the day, men were able to do these things because they had a wife at home looking after the children, looking after the day-to-day running of the house, so that their career could progress. And having that typically linear career progression is generally what leads into those leadership roles. So a barrier is being able to have leadership where we're not just looking at that linear progression of career. We're looking at skills and capability that does come from being a mother, like time management, emotional intelligence, crisis management. It's really invaluable in leadership, and we need to realize those strengths don't just come from being in the workplace for 30 or 40 years straight. We're really capable at being good leaders, and that doesn't come only from the workplace. There's whole life experiences that lead to that.
Yes, certainly so. What about Leslie? I bet you've seen a lot of progress over the years, but are there other barriers you'd love to see broken down, or something there that's still yet to be done?
Look, I actually think it's up to us to a great extent. We have to take the lead. And, when I think over the years, I've been in meetings where, we've been belittled or not given a chance to speak. And I wouldn't tolerate that now. As I've got older, I just wouldn't tolerate it. There's no way that I'd tolerate it. And it's certainly true what Ellen says. A lot of those time management skills and leadership skills, we've got to encourage our girls to learn those in the schoolyard and develop them to do that, so that people won't walk all over them, and they'll step up and take the lead. I think we're seeing a whole different generation of girls come through. And while you don't want them to be bullies, but they certainly have leadership skills and, time management skills, and a lot of those great skills that are so essential in management. I guess in saying that, we've got to encourage our boys to have them as well, because, they have to be able to take the lead. But it's certainly, I've seen a lot of changes and generational changes. And as I say, things that we'd tolerate once, we would never tolerate now. We really wouldn't.
Did you face, Leslie, I'm sure over the years, stereotypes or biases regarding your capabilities because you're a mum? You've worked through, you don't got grandchildren now, but you had your 3 little children. I think it was out at Mount Isa. Did you feel that then when you came back, you had to work harder to establish your authority into leadership roles? Did you have to fight harder for those positions?
Look, it wasn't in Mount Isa because we never had any staff, and someone had to step up, and so
it's a good advert for going out remote. The positions are there,
and so of course I stepped up because I liked being the boss. But I recall once applying for a position and having an interview, and it was a woman who said it, And, I divulged that I had 3 small children, one of whom was still breastfed. And she made the comment, I'd just like to know who's going to look after the 3 small children if we give you the job. Needless to say, I didn't get the job, but after that comment, I really didn't want it, because I thought, gee, if that's coming from a woman, that's just not what you want. I wouldn't be applying if I didn't honestly believe that I could do it. But I think over the years there's been so many stereotypes that you're just a nurse, that sort of thing. And I think, I'm just pleased that times have changed. And I think they had to change. We could never have gone on with an existence like that. I'll tell you a story briefly. When I was a student nurse, our medical director would do rounds. And the expectation was that we hid in the pan room, and then we'd get chastised after the doctor's round because we made too much noise cleaning the pans. So, and you stood with your hands behind your back, that sort of thing. I'd die if that sort of thing happened now. I really would. And I think that we really need to make sure that those times never return and we keep progressing women.
Karen, what about women supporting women? Leslie made a good point,
Yeah.
having an interview with another woman who's
Yeah.
saying, how's that going to work?
Yeah.
Are women supporting women in healthcare? Is there a mean girl culture that we're not aware of, or are we seeing this?
It's really interesting, isn't it? Because I'm listening to Leslie and shuddering at those times, like being ex-military. I'm completely there with what you're talking about. But I've never been involved in doctors doing that to our nursing staff who are usually valued, but. As far as the mean girls, I just find it really interesting this tension between women, particularly in medicine and nursing. There seems to be this, and I wonder whether it's been born out of the male domination, in the past, and nurses having to fight for everything that they've got, just as women in medicine have had to fight for everything that they've got. But we haven't got that. Generally speaking, sometimes I hear of situations where that balance hasn't been found, that there's that equal respect for skill sets. There's almost like a fear whether you're a doctor you're going to get in trouble from the nurse or vice versa. So I find that there's, in particularly the younger generation, at times there can be a mean girl blick culture. And it's quite distressing, because I'm curious always to unpick that, to see, well, where is that coming from? Why is that there? What is that an insecurity? Is it been something that's been done, or and I think as women we have to be curious and unpick that when someone is being mean, and it's a female colleague that is being mean, or a few of them. We have a responsibility as female leaders to try and unpick that and support them to not be mean.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Ellen?
I actually think it comes from a hierarchy idea in the back of their mind, like I don't like to say it, but people think I'm better than you, and in either way, or I know more than you, I've been here longer mentality. And we're all the same team. I might serve this purpose, you might serve this purpose, but we can't work without each other. I can't be a good dentist without my assistant. I can't work alone. We're all part of each other's team, and it's bringing each other together and building each other up, not tearing each other down. But I've definitely seen it happen.
And something else that was said by Leslie about fighting harder. I think I fought so hard for every single thing that I've achieved in my life. And it sounds like both of you, Ellen and Leslie, have as well, and Sam, of course.
Yeah.
But yeah, that if to fight, it's hard to continue fighting sometimes. And yeah, as much as I think that we'd like to think that there's equal opportunity and there's all those words out there to say that there's equal opportunity, there just isn't. There's still boys' clubs.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yep. And I think we have to train our daughters to be strong.
Yes.
You know,
My daughter trains me.
Yeah.
Mine does too.
Ellen, can I ask you, Ellen, though, you've been very open about your neurodivergent diagnoses. What do you need to thrive in healthcare? And do you think that that's put an extra layer of complexity for you? And I guess, would that be the same for a guy that was neurodivergent? A lot of questions there for you, but, you know, I'm sure there's lots you could share.
Yeah, and certainly being late diagnosed, having that look back over the years and going, oh, that would have made that situation so much easier if I'd just known a little bit more about how my brain was working in that situation, and that I wasn't trying to create fights. I just wanted to understand more. People thought I was just asking too many questions and I was questioning their authority. It wasn't ever, but it often came across that way, and it was understanding more about myself. It was really just being diagnosed became a big part of just self-discovery and learning how to communicate across those differences. That's made such a big change. And something that helped me a lot is finding great mentors and coaches that have helped with learning more about the differences within our dental communities and our dental profession as well, and helping me find ways to balance that at work life and that at home life, because I definitely struggle with the switching off and going home and having some relax so that I don't fully burn out regularly, which I did for many years when I was that little bit younger. And I don't know, I can't speak to males with neurodivergence, partly because there's already an imbalance just in the diagnosis of men with neurodivergence. So it's probably not my place to speak to their experience anyway.
Leslie, you talked about a lot of progress and where we've come from, and I guess the role for our daughters going forward and education, all of these things. Over all of the years, has there been a moment that you've experienced that was like a real defining point that really started to highlight progress, where you could feel momentum?
Yeah, look, in the 80s, we were the only hospital that wore veils, and the only hospital in Queensland that was still wearing veils, would you believe? And we'd had a director of nursing, or a matron then, for a long time, and everybody was keen to take them off, but I was in a fairly senior position, and I always argued against it because I said, I don't want to break the poor old girl's heart. So I fought against it. She retired, and of course the staff were at me, let's get rid of our veils. Anyway, I went to the deputy director of nursing and said, look, this is what the staff want to do. And I thought she was going to drop dead on the spot. She was so mortified. However, she came around, and we had to have an alternative, which of course was an epaulette, because there's always that military sort of background. Anyway, we took our veils off, and to me that was so defining. Senior doctors would look at us and as though there was something wrong with it, as though we had two heads. But I think that was really defining. All of a sudden we were seeing that we could make decisions, and as a group we could be powerful. Because when you consider it, nursing's probably the biggest workforce in Australia or in the world, the biggest single workforce, and probably the biggest single female workforce. So really, on the law of averages, we've got power. And it took us a little while to realise that. But I think, we had to stand together and we had to make that decision, which at the time it just seemed enormous. Now I look back on it and think, my God, did I really do that? But I think that, as a group, we're extremely powerful, but it's taken us many years to realise that. And I think for me, in my career, that was quite a defining moment.
Yeah, I bet. Karen, have you had any similarly impactful defining moments?
Defining moments. Oh, no, not as impactful as that. I think that is just so demonstrative of something symbolic being broken down.
Yeah.
I just think that that is an amazing example. I, going back to it being hard to get to where we've got, defining moment for me is being able to feel comfortable to say, well, I'm going to ask for a 0.8 FTE. Like, I'm going to ask for reduced hours because I need those reduced hours. I need some time to do other stuff. But I think we've come as a whole group, both male and female, we've come a lot, the workplaces and healthcare has come a long way to allowing that part-time work to be a lot more acceptable. And
because is that the case now, that it is more acceptable for women to work a part-time role?
Yes, because we do, as has been said here in this webinar, we do have the skills to do that, and we do have the time management. A personal journey of learning how to say no has occurred to me as well. But, that comes along with a permanent part-time role. But I think there's also an element in healthcare that we know that the moral burden and the emotional burden that we have as individual caregivers for others also takes a toll, and we need to look after ourselves in that. So I just, for me personally, not necessarily women or the industry, but to be able to ask to have permanent part-time is, I think it's an amazing progress, and I can thank the many generations of predecessors for that.
I bet.
Yeah.
Ellen, how can we better support neurodivergent women in healthcare? With all of the things that you've learned and experienced, what can we do different going forward?
I think a lot of it starts with understanding and accepting differences. I still see such a limited understanding of the differences that people have, just simply in the way their brains work, perhaps in the way they communicate and the way they might need to work. I definitely have really fluctuating productivity, but in the sense that if it's something that I have a really great interest in, I can be so hyper focused and working on it that if I'm given sort of an outer framework and a freedom to work in that, the content and productivity that I can come out with is enormous. This year alone, I've been tasked with a graduate development program, and it's been amazing because it's something I'm so passionate about. And so working with people with a neurodivergence, if it's something that they're passionate about, often you can really find such passionate team members, and working to find their strengths in that team, working to find ways to better communicate with them, and even just finding ways to make meetings and announcements more accessible. Sometimes when we're having virtual meetings, if there's slideshows and stuff, if they're shared beforehand, I've got time to read it so that I'm not trying to both read that and hear the words, because doing both at the same time, sometimes it's a little bit overwhelming. And it's not because I can't take in a lot of information. It's just that the audio processing of someone off in another room where the sound's not always the best quality, having all that paper ahead of time. And damn, you guys at CMR are so fantastic at that. You always send me stuff ahead of time and just give my brain a little bit of time to be that bit more prepared and have that time to process stuff. And I really always appreciate that.
I think we've always really recognised that you're a little superstar. You know, even I remember when you went out on placement and you talked about, you know, for the team, it was like, just go to the door, you know, and you were like, but which door? Where am I at? And it actually started a conversation around where you said you always felt like you're asking more questions. We probably lent into more around, well, that's a really great question. Like, which door is it? And if I get there and I don't know if I go to the path to the left or the path to the right, and who am I going to be meeting with if they're not there? There's all of that where if we can work together and settle the brain, then you go in so much happier and calmer, and hence you've had such phenomenal outcomes at Geraldton, you know, because we've always played to your superpowers. Like, we've always seen that is your superpower. So it's been great to see you thrive there.
Yeah, and I've got new team members coming up next week, this week, tomorrow, and I've sent them all photos of how to find the clinic, what door to come to, my phone number, where to find us, who to contact if they can't reach me. And they were all like, oh, wow, oh my gosh, I actually know where I can park my car. I know what the parking situation's like. This is, oh, thank you so much. That makes me feel so much better about traveling to a new town because I've not been there before. And it's little things like that perhaps other people just, they intuitively know how to work that out. But I sit there going, oh, there's so many different things to think about and so many steps. Which one am I doing?
Yeah. And that just not just for someone who's neurodivergent. I mean, that experience now you've given to every person who's gone to Geraldton is so much better because of that. So, Ellen, if you could have a coffee with a graduate version of yourself, what advice would you give to her on how she can really thrive in her career?
Yeah. Well, it would definitely be a hot chocolate.
A hot chocolate, yeah.
I don't drink coffee. But I would definitely give the advice that your path is not going to look the same as everyone else's. And that's totally okay. Keep following your passions and embrace the unconventional, and don't be afraid to take up space in leadership.
It's beautiful. Karen, would you be having a coffee, a hot chocolate, a peppermint tea? What would you say? You could have a cocktail. You absolutely could have. If you were having a cocktail with a graduate version of yourself, what advice would you give?
I would say continue to back yourself. You've got it. And really just the sky's the limit. Just try it. There's nothing to lose.
Yeah, absolutely. Just say yes. Just say yes.
Just say yes.
And Leslie, a coffee, a cocktail, a hot chocolate. What would you say to that graduate version?
I'll say a double shot, but it would probably be a champagne.
Oh, yeah.
I'm leaving right next to you.
I knew you wouldn't let me down, Leslie.
Yeah.
So, and I'd say never let a chance go by. You know, often my kids are offered things or my grandkids are offered things and they say, what do you think, Grandma? And I say, never let a chance go by. It doesn't matter how bizarre it seems, never let a chance go by. We tend to take soft options and make safe decisions, but, we never know whether they're the right decisions. And I just think that regardless, never let a chance go by, just jump in.
And I think that's really true, in terms of the theme of International Women's Day, march forward. And if we're willing to never let a chance go by, you can only thrive. Every opportunity is a moment to move forward and keep momentum going. So that's a beautiful way.
It took me a while to realise that.
I think I would say that too over all of the years. Even when you're younger, you're always that little bit scared. Whereas now it's say yes, and you just don't know. And sometimes what doesn't present at that moment. It's sometimes a year or longer after that the impact from that moment is felt.
My dad always used to say, make every post a winner.
Yep, good one.
Yeah.
Mm.
So on that, thank you all so much for your time. It's been so great to hear such different experiences, perspectives. There's been so much progress and certainly a lot to come. And you're all three very inspirational women. So thank you so much for your time today.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Mm.
Thanks, Sam.